In school, one of the most important goals of the education system is to train students in critical thinking. When we go for job interviews, especially for high-level positions, employers focus on assessing candidates' critical thinking abilities. However, it is unfortunate that many of us, despite spending years in school and even working for many years, still do not know what critical thinking is or how we can develop this skill. This is not entirely our fault, it is partly due to the education system. Therefore, in today's video, we will explore the definition, benefits, and ways to cultivate critical thinking for ourselves. Now, let's dive into the main content. First, let's explore the definition of critical thinking. There are many different definitions of critical thinking, and these definitions are often very complex and hard to understand. Therefore, I have chosen the simplest definition to introduce to everyone, which is presented as follows. Critical thinking is the process of thoughts and ideas debating with each other. It involves self-questioning, making assumptions, and seeking evidence to make reasonable, objective, and accurate decisions. Now, I will provide an example to make it easier for everyone to visualize. Imagine you are walking down the street and see two people debating about a certain issue. Although it is a debate, these two people are behaving very politely and are not arguing. Now, imagine that instead of these two people debating on the street, they are debating inside your head. These two people represent your two thoughts. This is what critical thinking is all about. Additionally, I need to clarify that many people often mistakenly believe that critical thinking means having to argue and debate with others to defend their opinions. This is a mistaken thought because the main subject of critical thinking is not others, but oneself. We self-critique to arrive at accurate and objective thoughts, evaluations, and solutions, rather than using it to argue with others to prove ourselves right and them wrong. Of course, there will be special cases, such as when you are participating in a company meeting. At that time, everyone can express their opinions and critique each other to make the best decision for the company. The goal here is not to prove oneself right but to provide the best solution for the company. Therefore, critical thinking is not about arguing with everyone you meet or debating every issue. We only use it for issues and viewpoints that are truly important. The key here is necessity. If we debate every problem we encounter, we will shift from critical thinking to overthinking. Now, let's move on to the next part, the benefits of critical thinking. The greatest benefit of excellent critical thinking is that it helps us arrive at accurate and objective thoughts, judgments, and solutions. Imagine you currently have some spare money and want to invest it in the stock market. However, you are unsure which stocks to invest in. This is when critical thinking comes into play. If you possess good critical thinking skills, you will be able to ask questions, analyze, and evaluate which companies have strong growth potential in the future, what their competitive advantages are, and whether the company's leadership consists of capable and reputable individuals. At this point, if your critical thinking ability is strong, you will make accurate and profitable decisions. On the contrary, if your critical thinking skills are weak, you may make wrong decisions that lead to losses. Another benefit of critical thinking is that it helps us develop independent thinking and not be swayed by the crowd. Now, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Imagine you are in a large auditorium with thousands of people. The host then poses a question along with 4 possible answers, A, B, C, and D. After hearing the question, you know the correct answer is C, and you are very confident in this answer. However, it is surprising that when the host asks for the answers from the first 100 people, they all respond with answer A. At this moment, When the host comes to you and asks for your answer, will you still dare to say answer C? Or will you also choose the answer like everyone else? This is the influence of the tribal effect. In primitive times, humans often lived in tribes. This helped them stay safe from wild animals and care for one another. Within a tribe, people usually share similar thoughts and ways of thinking. If any member is different from others, that person may be expelled from the tribe and may end up being eaten by wild beasts. Currently, even after thousands of years, this effect still remains in our DNA. This effect makes us feel anxious and fearful when we are too different from those around us because this can cause us to be unaccepted by others. However, as you already know, society nowadays has changed a lot. Even if you are different from everyone else or society does not recognize you, this no longer affects your safety. All the animals that could eat you have either become extinct or are confined in zoos. In fact, this is a time when society desperately needs those who are different. They will be the ones to lead the world. All the leaders of countries or large companies are individuals with independent thinking. They are not easily influenced by the crowd. One of the prominent figures is Elon Musk. Without Musk, it is very likely that the current world would not have any electric cars on the roads. If it weren't for Musk, no one would be attempting to go to Mars either. This highlights the importance of independent thinking. And the most crucial factor that fosters independent thought is the ability to self-critique. Now, let's move on to the next part, the fundamental principles of critical thinking. The first principle is to ask questions intelligently. To be a good critical thinker, you must be someone who can ask good questions. I will provide an example for better understanding. Imagine you are driving down the road and your car suddenly stalls. No matter how hard you try to restart it, the car won't move. At this moment, you might think, where is the car broken? So, you push the car to the repair shop. The shop owner, after a while of working hard on the repairs, suddenly stands up and tells you that the car is out of gas. So, what was the problem here? The issue lies in the fact that you asked the wrong question. If, when the car broke down, you had replaced the question, where is the car broken, with, why is the car not moving? You might have thought about the possibility that the car was out of gas. Additionally, if you frequently use ChatGPT, you will know that the quality of the answers provided by AI entirely depends on the quality of the questions you input. The same applies to critical thinking. You can only obtain the correct answers if you ask the right questions. The skill of asking questions is also very important. So you can read books and self-learn to develop this skill. The next principle is curiosity. This is a very important aspect because, without curiosity, why would we even ask questions? When we were children, we were all very curious. We asked our parents about everything around us. Everything felt like a miracle. However, as we grew older, our lives gradually became monotonous and dull. We no longer felt curious about anything and viewed everything as a given. This is a loss for us. It is curiosity that drives our desire to learn, which in turn helps our thoughts and intellect to develop. Now, let's move on to the next principle, achieving fairness in thought. This can be said to be the most important foundation of critical thinking. But it is also the hardest to achieve. The reason I say this is the most important principle is that if we do not have fairness in our thinking, our thoughts and decisions will lack objectivity and accuracy. The reason I say this is the hardest to implement is that we all tend to be biased toward our ego and beliefs. At the same time, we also tend to be biased toward the society we live in. To make it easier to understand, let's consider the following examples. The first case is when you accidentally hear someone speaking badly about you. For example, they say you're ugly, poor, and not intelligent. At that moment, almost all of us feel angry and uncomfortable. We hardly care whether what they say is true or false, whether it is factual or not. Most of us will only try to refute their opinion. This is the influence of ego on our thinking. Now, let's look at another example. If someone asks you which country has the best coffee in the world, there's a 99% chance you'll say that your country's coffee is the best. If you ask a Vietnamese person, they will reply that Vietnamese coffee is the best. If you ask a Brazilian, they will say Brazilian coffee is the best. And if you ask an American, they will say that Starbucks is king. This is the bias towards the society we live in. Another example is when faced with the question, is eating meat good for health? A Muslim will say that eating pork is not good. A Hindu will say that eating beef is not good. And a Buddhist will say that eating meat is not good. Clearly, to determine whether a type of meat is good for health or not, we must rely on evidence and scientific research, not just personal beliefs. This illustrates the influence of beliefs and religions on our thinking. As you can see, to achieve fairness in thought, our thinking must be neutral, free from bias towards ego, beliefs, or the society we live in. Only then can our judgments and solutions be objective and true. Now, let's move on to the next principle: the ability to accept and consider the viewpoints of others. Some people always believe that their opinion is right and do not accept or consider the opinions of others. This is a sign of someone with an inflated ego. And when we do not consider the viewpoints of others, our perspective becomes very narrow, and our critical thinking ability is severely limited. Therefore, to become an excellent critical thinker, you need to have intellectual humility. As the philosopher Socrates once said, "I know that I know nothing." This intellectual humility allows us to receive and consider different perspectives openly, helping us to learn new things and contribute to our intellectual development. Now, let's move on to the next part: ways to cultivate critical thinking. The first method I want to introduce to you is reading books. The benefits of reading are well known to all of us. However, one benefit that few people notice is that reading helps develop our critical thinking. To clarify this point, I will divide readers into two types. The first type is those who read straight through from the beginning to the end of a book without stopping to think. These are the people who absorb knowledge passively without any critical thinking. As a famous saying goes, if you read books and believe everything in them, it's better not to read at all. The second type of reader is those who read a bit, and then stop to think. In their minds, questions arise such as, why did the author say that? Is this true or false? Does this apply to everyone? Does this apply to me? After answering these questions, they continue reading. A little later, they stop and reflect again. This process repeats continuously. These are the people who read books actively. They read while critically engaging with the author's statements and viewpoints. To make this clearer, let me give you an example. I once read a book by Osho. In the book, the author makes a statement that choice leads to illness. The author's point is that people should say yes to everything they want and should not forbid themselves from anything. The author argues that when we want to make something but our rational mind says it's not good for us, we suppress this desire with willpower. This suppression fragments our consciousness and leads to unhappiness. When I first encountered this statement, I disagreed but did not oppose it. I simply set it aside without judgment. However, after some time, I think that if people say yes to everything they want, they would also say yes to drugs, alcohol, gambling, etc. And if they actually did all these things, their lives would be very unhappy. Therefore, I concluded that the author's viewpoint was incorrect. This is an example of how we cultivate critical thinking while reading. The next method is keeping a diary. Each day, you can set aside at least 10 minutes in the evening to write in your diary. You can ask and answer questions such as, what did I do well today? Is there a way I can do better next time? What did I do wrong today? Why did I make that mistake? What lessons can I learn to avoid making this mistake again? What is the lesson of today? Writing a diary not only helps you record your thoughts but also aids in developing critical thinking through self-questioning and self-evaluation. If you practice this habit every day, your critical thinking and quality of life will gradually improve. These are excellent habits for your life. Through today's video, we have explored the definition of critical thinking. Simply put, it is the process of thoughts and ideas debating with each other. It involves self-questioning, making assumptions, and seeking evidence to make reasonable, objective, and accurate decisions. We have also explored the benefits of critical thinking, which helps us develop independent thought and enhance our quality of life. Next, we discussed the principles of critical thinking, such as the importance of asking questions, curiosity, achieving fairness in thought, and the ability to accept and consider the viewpoints of others. Finally, we covered methods to cultivate critical thinking, such as reading books and keeping a diary. Alright, the video ends here. See you in the next video and have a nice day.